Hello, I'm John Lewis, and I'm director of Goals for Dallas. In thinking about the needs of the Dallas area and specific goals that we must all support to deal with these needs, it helps to know exactly what is required to achieve community goals. It can also be helpful to look in and observe how others go about it. These are the subjects of the following presentations as part of a preparatory conference held in April of 1983 that kicked off a New Goals for Dallas process for the Dallas area.
It has been a great conference up to now, and I have certainly enjoyed being here. It has caused me to have moments of nostalgia and a great feeling about Dallas, a self-renewed. Back in 1965, one of our great citizens said, "Shall we deal adequately with the future or be run over by it? We must dream no small dreams. We must envision great, ambitious, difficult goals. Yet our objectives must be within our reach." Thank God for that citizen. Thank God for Eric Johnson. That's why we're here. This was a man of vision and a man who loved this city. This is the man who caused me to take a look at this city and come to love it and cherish it and want to be a part of it. And then last night, John Naisbitt said, "People whose lives are affected by a decision must be part of the process of arriving at that decision." But Eric Johnson knew that back in 1965. And that's why we are gathered from one end of the spectrum to another to take another look to see where we can go on. We've seen many dreams become realities just from the goals. Just this morning, we saw the groundbreaking for the new convention center. And that was really a great occasion that I happened to miss because of being here, but I know that it was the coming of a realization of a goal. Then back in 1976, I had the opportunity to be a part of organizing what became Goals for Black Dallas. And as strange as it might seem, we were very diverse from one end of the spectrum to the other. But what we found is that we were not in conflict with the overall goals for Dallas. We simply put it in a perspective where we could deal with it, where we could achieve them. And so as of 2 o'clock tomorrow, we will have completed the sale for all the stock to open a small bank that became a goal at that time that will be owned and operated by black people. The realization of a goal, and that is a part of the overall goals of Dallas. And then we have Clean South Dallas going, and it is a part of the environment goals. That's how goals become realities. It's because we have people that are interested in making them happen. It's because we have Idella Rabin, a Bill Nickel, a Grover Keaton, a Isabel Calora, a C.A. Tatum, a Marvin Robinson, Patricia Russell, Bert Holmes, you, me, and all of us. That's how things happen, and we must continue to make them happen. John again said, "My God, what a fantastic time to be alive." And I will say, what a fantastic time to be a Dallasite. We this morning will be talking about perspectives on how goals are achieved in Dallas. And we have some really dynamic speakers. David Black, who is the assistant to the city manager for the city of Dallas for the perspective from inside local government. And Kathy Majors, the president of Winnetka Heights Neighborhood Organization, the perspective of a neighborhood organization. And Dr. Phil Montgomery, the father of Phil Montgomery, coordinator. As a matter of fact, I thought you were Dr. Patrick O'Brien Montgomery.
No, I'm Philip Spock.
You're okay. Coordinator for Dallas Arts District, the perspective of a public-private partnership. Listen now to our presenters, and then we shall get further instructions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. First of all, I want to say to you that it's quite awe-inspiring to, first of all, be in this room. It's such a magnificent place to be in and to look out among the various community leaders of Dallas. And secondly, to know that Mayor Johnson is sitting just right there in the fifth row, as Mayor Evans has called him the mayor for all times for Dallas, and to know that he was the father of this whole thing and got it started, that's quite awe-inspiring. I want to talk about briefly, and I know we're running a little bit short on time, two of the goals that the city of Dallas participates in and that we feel like we have either achieved part of the goal on or that we're continuing to do so. And I want to talk as specifically as I can about the process that we've used so that if you have an organization in Dallas, a different kind of organization than ours, you might take that format and utilize it in your own situation. The first goal the first government goal that I want to address is goal number 4. It basically is the one that says governmental services evaluated against objective criteria and elimination of unnecessary services. About a year and a half ago, when Charles Anderson became the new city manager for Dallas, one of the first things he wanted to do was to try to convince not only the organization but the city council and the citizens that we were continuing to look for productivity inside our own organization. He thereby established a new kind of entity for the city called Productivity Task Forces. In that year, we took about 35 people from inside the city of Dallas, from various departments. These were city employees, the cream of the crop, I guess, if I can phrase it that way. They worked on about 7 different areas. They worked on price agreements and inventory control, tax collection enhancements, public affairs, data services, cash management, payroll, and personnel. And I only mention those in passing just to give you a flavor for the kind and scope of things that we were willing to look at. Now, the process began as follows. At one of the regular yearly retreats that our department directors take, Chuck asked the department directors to look at the organization not only from the perspective of their own department, but for how it was working throughout the city. What are the support services in our government that they rely upon that they may not be getting the kind of service that they really need? The department heads spent many days in trying to come up with the list of finally the cull down list that I mentioned to you a while ago that we wanted to concentrate on. But out of that, and the very beginning and the groundwork for that whole process was the dedication to the idea that we have not done all that we can do every year when we put the budget together to find productivity. Heretofore, it mostly had been a process of a department taking its own budget and trying to convince the manager that they were being productive and that the dollars they were asking for in the budget were going to be well spent. This was an opportunity for others inside the organization to look at another department and to say, how can we do a better job? So that was the challenge that Mr. Anderson put forth that finally turned into a thing we call the Productivity Task Forces. The timing, I'll have to admit to you, if we're talking about practical things, the timing was right because Chuck was the new city manager. And being a new city manager, it was obviously time for him to some have said make his mark, but really it was a time for him to take a fresh look at the organization and confirm the things that were good and to try to make better the things that could be enhanced. Traditionally now, the city we've always had productivity efforts going on. Traditionally, we would hire a consultant to come into the city and to study an area and to make recommendations. Often enough, many of those recommendations required us to spend money before we could save money, and it was very difficult often to get those even started implementing those. There's a stack of those, quite frankly, that still have not been fully implemented. This approach was new. This approach was to take in-house people, to take people from various departments who had nothing to do with that particular area, who were still competent and who could look freshly at their colleagues and make meaningful kinds of suggestions. Second area that I want to talk about is Goal 5 under government, which which the City of Dallas is directly involved in, and that's basically enhancing the Central Business District, trying to get people to come back to the Central Business District after night and to make that a really people place. Now, under the Schrader administration, obviously we are already well on the way to doing some of those great projects. I'll just say them to bring them back to mind for you. The Reunion Project, the Bryan Place development with the use of the area-wide redevelopment program. Those are two of the notable ones that George Schrader started as city manager. I think it's fair to say the Anderson administration is really trying to take that basis that George Schrader laid and to take the vision that anything we can dream can become a reality in downtown if we really want it badly enough. We are increasingly willing to recommend to the council that we use our financial resources and or our financial backing to promote joint public-private ventures. And in just a moment, you will be greatly pleased, I'm sure, to listen to the esteemed Dr. Montgomery talk about the Arts District. That's just one of the several things that we're beginning to work on. Not only the Arts District, but the Farmers Market Revitalization Project, the Oak Lawn Revitalization Study, the Fair Park Link for the Sesquicentennial, I almost said it correctly, the West End Historic District, and of course, the biggest vision of all that we're starting to work on, Town Lake. All of those things are projects that we feel very dedicated to. But as Dr. Cafferty said a while ago, we are dedicated that when we give out, that when we lend our support to a private venture or a public-private venture, that we know what the public purpose is. There is no reason for the public to be involved in using its financial resources or its financial backing if there is not a public purpose involved.
Thank you.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for inviting Winnetka Heights to participate in this forum. I hate to follow David because their method of achieving goals is certainly a lot more organized and laid out than ours has been. But somehow, even though we weren't very organized and we didn't go through the Goals for Dallas book and pick out the goals we were trying to achieve, we've managed to hit a great many of them in the last 10 years. Such as the regeneration of established neighborhoods, the maintenance of existing housing, the preservation of the city's historic character, finding feasible methods of preservation and use of historically significant areas, and the revitalization of the inner city. The roots of our revitalization actually go back to the early 70s, when a group of the residents, some of them long time, some of them new people who had been attracted by the area's historic significance, banded together and decided to fight to save the neighborhood and retain its historic integrity. They founded the Old Oak Cliff Conservation League, which is still in existence today and is now serving as an umbrella group for about 8 separate neighborhood organizations in Oak Cliff and for people who are interested in preservation of Old Oak Cliff. By 1975, the City of Dallas had awarded a planned development zoning for the area which protected its residential nature. Things sort of drifted along for several years until early in 1981, when in an attempt to stop the expansion of the Salvation Army in Winnetka Heights, the neighbors banded together, formed the neighborhood association, and decided to pursue historic designation. At that time, the city had not allocated any resources for a campaign of that sort. Other neighborhoods have taken upwards of 2 years to achieve historic designation once they'd begun the process. They told us we had 6 months to do the work. They would issue a moratorium on building permits for that period. At the end of the time, if we hadn't achieved the designation, the moratorium would have to be lifted. Actually, that probably was the best thing that ever happened to us. In retrospect, if we hadn't had that 6 months deadline, we might still be working on historic designation. It was mentioned earlier that setting deadlines is important, and I think that's probably true. Without that, I don't think we'd have ever achieved what we were trying to do in the period that we did it. What it took was a massive commitment of a lot of people to work toward the goal of historic designation. We had several hundred people totally that worked on that effort for 4 or 5 months. Sometimes it was the only thing we did from morning until night. We did it by an effective communications network that started in the top and worked down to a block level, where on each block we had appointed a person responsible for circulating petitions, for distributing newsletters, which we were publishing at least every 1 or 2 weeks, and for announcing the meetings in the area. In a 3-month period, we had perhaps 100 community meetings of various sorts. Sometimes we had 2 or 3 going on the same night, as many as 10 in 1 week. It took an enormous commitment of time, energy, and effort from everybody that was involved. One of the most controversial sections of getting historic designation is the writing of guidelines for the exterior work that's done in your house. In a historic district, you cannot do anything you want to the exterior of your house. That was the most controversial part of the whole process. We tried to minimize it by getting input from as many people as we could. We had meetings on every block in the community. Then we had larger meetings where we went over the goals that had been set up, the criteria that they had asked for. We had community-wide meetings where we could all talk about what each one of us had decided. At the end of the 3 months period for that, we had achieved a definite form of unity, which was something that we were in shock, actually, because it happened so fast. We'd started working in February. In September, the City Council, with no opposition from anybody in the audience, voted unanimously to grant us historic designation. One of the reasons that we've been successful, and one of the reasons that other neighborhood organizations have been successful, is that we've gotten involved in the political process. I've heard some people talk on and off this morning about getting grassroots involvement. If you sit back and wait for the city or someone else to ask you to get involved, you may still be sitting and waiting 10 years from now. You need to find out who's doing what and why, and you need to find out what their time frame is. You're never going to find out sitting home. You have to get down to City Hall and dig around. You have to get to know people, and it may even require you to go out and work for the election of a city councilman that's sympathetic to your needs. That happens in several areas in this last election. But it's very important that everybody get involved in their neighborhood. If they don't, then they're going to be complaining in 3 years from now or 5 years from now about what's happened. But sometimes it's their own fault because they have not taken the interest in finding out what has happened.
Thank you.
My colleagues will excuse me for standing here. It's because the control to some slides that I want to show you is here. Madam Chairman, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be known as Philip's father. It's a great distinction. I hope it continues. I'm also pleased that our former mayor, Mr. Johnson, a close personal friend, is here, because I think more than anyone else, he taught Dallas to dream. More than teaching us to dream, he taught us to work. And more than teaching us to work, he taught us to work with patience and good sense and with continued courage. A truly remarkable person. This is the Arts District. I was appointed as coordinator of the Arts District by the mayor and the council, without salary, without staff, without office, without portfolio, without authority, and practically without influence, except that I happen to be a doctor, and people generally in our society, fortunately, are somewhat respectful of doctors. I had one perk. I have a sticker that lets me park in the basement of City Hall, a very important status symbol in our government. My assignment was to take this 60-area district and create for it the finest arts district in the world. To give you some idea of the challenge involved, this is 60 acres of downtown Dallas. When fully developed, the land alone will be worth $2.5 billion. The buildings will add another $2.5 billion. There will be 10 million square feet of space. 1/3 of all the space in downtown Dallas presently existing will be recreated in this district. That despite the fact that half the land is in public hands and half the land is in private hands. If we look at the district then as it exists now, you can see it's not really something the tourists come to Dallas for. So we were to take this, what you see here, and transform it to this. This is the Sasaki plan, beautiful landscaping, a widened 100-foot wide boulevard, various setbacks and height controls, city ordinances, which now designate what you can and cannot do. When it is finally built, it will look like this. That's 10 million square feet of office space, a total project cost in excess of $5 billion, and we expect to do that in the next 10 to 15 years. And this morning, I'm pleased to tell you, as Eddie Bernice did, at 10 o'clock we broke ground for the concert hall, a major step forward. This district will also contain the following elements. It will contain as a major anchor on one end of Flora Street that starts the district, the new Dallas Museum of Fine Arts. It will contain, halfway down the district, the Dallas Symphony, for which we broke ground this morning, a building designed by I.M. Pei. It also contains the Guadalupe Cathedral. It contains the Adams Magnet High School, the First United Methodist Church, the legal foundation of Belo, and major developers. Now, if you're faced with this as your challenge, what in the world do you do to solve this? Well, I think I've already indicated to you, you try to build a team. And you build a team around common problems that influence everyone, because everyone can talk about their problems. If you don't believe it, ask a patient if they have headaches sometime, or ask your friend if they have headaches. Everybody has headaches. You can start a conversation with anybody by just asking the last time they had a headache. So we had to find out what the headaches were. Well, I've already told you, they're Flora Street and they're parking. Now, who's involved in that? And how do you deal with who's involved in it? First of all, the city's involved in it. Now, my deal with the mayor was that I could call him day or night, Saturday, Sunday, off the golf course, at any time that I felt necessary to do so in the interest of the Arts District, with a clear understanding I would speak to no member of the council unless spoken to, that was his problem. In this affair, I have called the mayor exactly 3 times, each time with the result that I wanted, and I'm pleased to tell you that's what leadership is all about. Secondly, you have to understand that the city manager is just exactly what that word says, a manager. Managers coordinate activities, they cause activities to be happen, but they do not do them. Don't go to the city manager unless you want something coordinated in a broad way. Where you go is to the assistant city manager, and he's there because his job is to do the work, and with his staff, he does the work. So on a workaday basis, you don't talk to the mayor and you don't talk to the city manager. Those are big cannons. You don't want to shoot big cannons off. In the first place, you're never sure where they'll go. And in the second place, they can backfire and kill you. So you work with the troops. And you work with the troops by taking your coat off and working in their style, on their turf, with their problems, until you understand them and they understand you and you get along. Secondly, you have the developers. The developer doesn't want to talk about anything. He wants to do something. And if you don't let him do something, he's not a developer. He's like a surgeon. A surgeon doesn't operate, he's not a surgeon. They get up in the morning, they operate. That's it. Don't operate, send them to medicine. We're surgeons. The developer is that way. He wants to operate. He wants to operate early in the morning and all day long and twice on the weekend if he can. So you got to give those tigers something to do. You don't want to talk to them. You want to say, tell me yes or no, this or that. Yes, no, okay, we'll go that way. And that's about how long it lasts. Then you have the churches. The churches are extremely sensitive to public opinion, as they should be. They're extremely cautious by their nature, and you have to go and make friends with the churches because they're important to you and to the district, and you must enlist their aid and their leadership and their enlightenment, and you must rely on their spiritual integrity when you talk about creating people places and spiritual places and why, and therefore they have a role on the team, and they play it very well. The lawyers are as interesting as the others. Like faculties, they don't want to make decisions. Like faculties, they do not originate things. Like faculties, they like committees. And like committees, they like committees best that don't do anything. They're a very special case, and you just have to accept that and do the best you can with them. Generally speaking, the best you can do with them is to threaten them from across the street with a powerful developer. Then you come to the symphony. What do symphonies do? They make music. They talk music, they think music, they eat music, their architects are musical, their acousticians are musical, their board is musical. That's got nothing to do with planning. We're trying to put together $5 billion worth of buildings and land. Well, bless their souls, that's the one thing that saved them. Because if they'd really understood what we were doing and trying to swap land for them, they would have been so horrified they'd rolled up their shoes and gone home. Instead of that, they passed a bond issue and are now raising $40 million, all out of faith. And that's remarkable. And it's because of the nature of the symphony, and if you understand that, you know that the symphony belongs not on second base or in left field. The symphony belongs at shortstop. That's what they do, and they do it well. Then you have the planners. Now, in order to get something like this done, clearly I'm not qualified to plan it. Very few people are. It's the biggest urban downtown design in the United States by a factor of 4. I've just come back from a national conference in Washington discussing such things around the country, and you know what the criticism was? Dallas, you're out of your mind. It's too big. Even in Texas, it's too big. You will never get away with that. Well, we are going to get away with it because we're determined. The planners are a special breed, like the others. And how do you deal with them? Very easy. You take the planner to every single property owner and you sit down with him and you make him stay there until he listens to everything that property owner has to say. And then you send him away and say, plant it. You bring him back, and this time you make him talk to all the adjacent property owners, 2 together, and you say, I want you to listen to what his problem is and his problem is because they're different, and your plan's got to solve both their problems in a coherent way. You got 3 weeks, come back. They come back, this time you make them plan with the whole 1/3 of the district with the property owners, and then you go down the district in thirds, and then when they come back with the final plan, you get everybody together. And by this time, everybody's so sick and tired of you planning and helping and talking and so forth that they say, we did it. And they approve the plan. Then you have the problem of going to City Hall to figure out how to get an ordinance passed. Now, let me tell you, if you think it's easy to get major developers of the type and stature that we have in the Arts District to agree to an ordinance that limits what they can do, you think again. However, if you make them plan for a year, then pretty soon they've got such an investment they want to protect it and they get more interested in having an ordinance because they don't know who the next guy is going to sell his property to and what impact that's going to have on theirs, and they think to myself, I better get an ordinance. How do you get them to draw an ordinance? Well, you have to be a little Machiavellian to do that, but that's okay, that's part of the game. What you do is you get the city to draw up the ordinance. Now, that's a wonderful exercise. City planners love that. They get out all the books, they read chapter 3, oh, that paragraph's good, put that in. They get out chapter 10, ooh, that's a lovely paragraph, put that in the ordinance. And pretty soon you've got a document that thick that no one can live with. You say, thank you, city, that's a wonderful job, it's just great, I'll give it to the developers. You give it to the developers, what are you doing, doctor? You're out of your mind giving us this and that. I said, you don't like that ordinance? Well, I'm surprised. I'll tell you what you do. Get your lawyers and draw up the ordinance you like, and I'll give it to the city and see that we get it passed. Oh, they said, that's fine. Well, they called their lawyers, and much to my astonishment, the lawyers had a great deal of trouble drawing the ordinance because their professional lives have been spent cracking ordinances, not creating. They're like good safecrackers. They're damn good at cracking ordinances. They can find loopholes in ordinances that bird dogs couldn't find. But you try to get them to create an ordinance and watch what happens. They argue with each other. Well, you can't put that in. That's too general a term. Well, how are you going to say it? Well, I don't know how to say it. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I don't know. We had 5 of the best lawyers in this city try to draw that ordinance. It took them 3 months. By that time, the owners were so disgusted with them, they took the ordinance and they said, we'll take it to the council, doctor. We want to deal with the council. We got it. You do it. I did it in 3 minutes. The toughest ordinance in Dallas, Texas ever proposed was passed without dissent from a single council member or comment, without dissent in a public meeting from a single citizen or property owner, and it was all over. Now, that is the result. That is the result of a huge amount of planning and successful planning. And let me tell you the last element, and I've saved it for last because it is among the most important. It is the press. The press, as everyone in public life knows, can literally make you and break you. They drove 2 presidents from office. They can start and stop wars, as we found out in the Spanish-American War. They can do a great many things for and to you. And the trick is to be sure they do it for you. And that's not as hard as you would think. How do you do that in this? Well, since I know nothing about it and I'm newly appointed, I've got a license to be dumb. That's a valuable license. You can't buy them. You have to sort of fall into them. And that license lets you go to the editor of the two newspapers and say, fellas, I'm a professor in the medical school. Worse than that, I'm a doctor. Worse than that, I'm in big trouble because the university has lent me to the city for this purpose. What do I do with the press? Oh, he said, that's nothing to that. We're so glad you came. You just stand up and be positive and act like you know what you're doing and run meetings in a crisp way and come to decisions, and they'll all be on your side. And by the way, take a couple of them out to lunch, and here are the two you take out to lunch and make friends with them because they love to be taken to lunch. I said, that's wonderful. They said, I'll tell you what else we'll do. We'll call them all together and put you on the stage and you explain your story, and I'm sure that it will work. And both newspapers were kind enough to do that for me. It was an extremely valuable piece of advice. I did take them to lunch. I did stroke them properly. I did tell them what I was doing. You must always have an answer. But I also had, unknown to them, one of the best public relations men in Dallas on my permanent telephone line. And that man advised me at every step of the way what was coming at me from the press and what the answers were. And once we got that in place, and once we got strung out, I can tell you absolutely truly, I believe we've generated the most astounding rapport with the public, which was the name of the game, for support of the Arts District. It reminded me of what a college fraternity brother of mine said. He said one time, you know, I don't believe my girl loves me. And another brother said, do you ever tell her that you love her? Oh, hell, he says, I tell her I love her so much I'm beginning to believe it myself. And we actually had the press so primed and working on our side that we began to think we were pretty damn good ourselves. And that this really was going to work. And it did. So it can have a mutually reinforcing thing. Well, I've taken too much of your time. I appreciate the opportunity. And again, I want to thank Mayor Johnson for this wonderful legacy. Thank you.
The presentations you have just seen were made at a preparatory conference in April of 1983 that kicked off a new Goals for Dallas process for the Dallas area. For more information about Goals for Dallas and how you can become part of it, call 741-1738.